Hey everyone, welcome to the Fullest podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Bostwick, and today's guest is Ara Katz, the co-founder and co-CEO of Seed Health, a microbial sciences company pioneering applications of bacteria to impact human and environmental health. In collaboration with leading scientists, their decentralized model enables rapid, efficient development of category-defining probiotics from discovery to market for GI health, skincare, oral care, women's health, and infant nutrition. Ara also co-leads Seed Labs, which develops novel applications of bacteria to solve some of our most pressing ecological challenges. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for joining me on basically a holiday.
I'm incredibly excited.
I am really excited because last time we spoke was at the conference that we had last year, and it was like an entrepreneurship panel, and I felt like, it was so short, like maybe 30 minutes, but I had learned so much from you, and I love how passionate you are about business in general and your company, and that you're a biotech company, and you guys, it's definitely so different because most probiotic companies or most companies like this would say that they're maybe a wellness company, but you really do the work to stand out. You guys do so much research. You invest so much of your time in making sure the products that you're putting out are backed clinically. And I really appreciate that and appreciate the transparency. And I know that there's so much that we can learn from you. I mean, even in the last 5 minutes talking to you, like before recording, I was like, oh, that's why there are different strains of probiotics. That makes sense. So I'm excited to dive a little deeper in that. But as a serial entrepreneur, I'm curious, like before Seed, I know you started another company, you advise other companies. So I want to learn a little bit about that. How did you find yourself in the business world?
It's so funny when you hear people talk about your experience and it's like not how you think about you. Like it's different than the way you think about it. It's kind of like, I've always been a storyteller and worked at kind of this intersection of like storytelling, design, and technology. And then the world calls you a marketer. And yeah. I'm always like, I'm in marketing? I didn't know I was in marketing. I didn't even like know, and I didn't even know I was in business, because I actually truthfully, and hopefully our investors are okay if they're hearing this, which is that I consider myself a creator.
Yeah.
And I love building things. And I love making things. And I think from a business perspective, I have always felt that the business world or the marketing world needed more of the humans that don't consider themselves of the business world and of the marketing world. And so, in a lot of ways, I ended up here because I love creating things, but I also understand how I think I've always felt that creating things, it wasn't just making things. It's kind of like how people articulate the difference sometimes between art and design.
Yeah.
Which is that art is like is an expression of an idea, and design is in service of something. And
That's so beautiful.
And I think that I love creating things that I feel part of that creation is how it goes out into the world and the impact it make, how people resonate with it. And I think in a lot of ways, my whole life, I've always wondered why human health, especially, and science, maybe zooming out one level, has really not had an opportunity to live in the world that way. And I think that starts really young, right? Like where like the kids who were interested in science were like nerds, like it was almost like the anti-social capital.
Yeah.
And so, and I think a lot of it has to do with the UI and the UX and the language and how we understand these things. It's why in the US it's not sexy to go into civic service, or it's not sexy to go into until it really wasn't until recently that politics has become a bit sexier.
Yeah.
But so I think I've always been like incredibly curious about how things can go out, how you can make a greater impact by actually applying the thinking that comes from actually not being a marketer or not thinking that you're in business, but then actually using those superpowers to create really compelling businesses and marketing. So I think that that's kind of probably a better way to articulate how I think about it for myself.
But what kind of like storytelling was inspiring? I mean, like, I think when you find yourself in this world or getting into it, like there's something that your background is super varied and you're part of so many different organizations. It's really impressive and amazing. I think at the heart of some of these things, like you said, some of it's very similar, but then when you get deep into these different organizations, they're so different. And I'm curious, like, what impact, obviously right now, like bacteria and its application is the most inspiring to you, right? Like, what, how did you get into that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, we'll be conscious of your time and not tell you my whole life story, but I'll give you the first Google result in the trailer.
I'm happy to hear the whole thing.
My mom got pancreatic cancer when I was 16 and died 361 days after her diagnosis.
Oh my
And
God.
that was my first experience understanding and researching, actually at that time, clinical trials and understanding how science happened for people that were sick. So that was like one of my first, and it was interesting because at the same time that she was involved in clinical trials and actually randomly had worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And so, I think there was a very big like orientation around like the science and the pharma kind of approach to cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there were like Reiki practitioners walking through our living room every day and like some variation of vegan shamans and like, and so I think that what I noticed and what I thought was fascinating at that time, and I think kind of set off a whole lifetime of this that led me to founding Seed, was that the way that science kind of shows up in people's life, particularly I think you find for women especially, I think, and maybe this resonates with you, you kind of find your way to your body two ways: pathology or pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Sick or you get knocked up.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear. Like women, you don't really have a reason to understand how your body works, your biology. And so I think since that time, I had always felt that I'm curious why we so easily deferred the agency of like making decisions for something as important like as our bodies to marketing, to the next wellness Instagram ad that comes along, to to people often who, even if they are a doctor, may not be speaking about the area of that they're actually an expert in. And so I was always like, I think that search for both the clinical trials and then just like watching really what happens when truly someone doesn't have health. I think just for me, it was like a very long, like lifelong curiosity, skepticism, honestly, like observational experiment in like how we rationalize and like think about our health, our bodies, the choices we make, what informs them, with so much energy spent without just picking up like a biology book or like and it's so funny because like I watch how long someone will spend like researching which car to buy.
Yeah.
Or like skincare.
Yeah.
And I mean, skin is of course a part of your body, but I mean more kind of more superficially. And I've always been like really like kind of confounded by that. And so when I started in like the tech world and like the startup world, I truthfully always knew I'd start something in health and science. I think since a very early age, I knew I would get there. I had been in and around through family and through my ex-boyfriend around the biotech and pharma world. So like I knew a lot about how like that worked, but I've also been a lifelong yogi and like for 20 years plus, like been in and around the yoga world. I was an early investor in like Mind Body Green. And so I kind of watched all of that kind of come up. And I think that I'm very grateful that the world certainly has started to move towards a kind of consciousness about their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the more deeper connectivity to a sense of experience. And I think, that is critical. But you also have to look at the fact that the wellness industry is $4.3 trillion. and we're still dying of non-communicable diseases at a greater rate than
Yeah.
anything else. And so, like, and I have incredible respect for people who've built great businesses, but at the end of the day, like, a lot of this would not exist if we truly understood our biology and
Yeah.
truly understood how our lives work. And I wonder what kinds of companies would be instead developed, not just biotech and pharma, and not things that are just going through like therapeutics, regulatory for like therapeutics, but like, I do wonder what all of the diet books would look like, and what all the nutrition programs would look like, and what the supplement aisle would look like if we just understood ourselves differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for a long time, Peter Thiel talks a lot about 0 to 1, which is, like, a lot of things are kind of tinkering, and very, very, very few times in your life you come across things that really like 0 to 1 the world, right? Like, actually, like, tangential jumps and leaps forward. And the tinkering is important. I mean, right? Like, you wouldn't have Friendster without Facebook, right? Like, it's not that the tinkering cannot be meaningful. It certainly can plant a lot of seeds. But I did feel that a lot of wellness fell in the tinkering, and that I had searched for a long time for what was going to be 0 to 1. And I had to cut forward. I had a miscarriage and resigned from my previous company, which is a mobile commerce company I started in New York called Spring. And it was just like a very pivotal moment for me to decide like what was viable and what I really wanted to do. Because once you know how to build technology companies, you know how to build consumer brands, you know how to raise capital, you know how to market, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know how to run a business. You know how to create impact and partnerships and things that kind of ripple out in the world. You really have to then sit down and say, well, what do I do with this, and how do I want to make an impact? And impact can include waking up every day to something that's fulfilling and meaningful. It doesn't always have to be like, you have to go. I don't think every business should go change the world. I think actually you can change the world by creating great companies and fulfilled people who are doing things that are meaningful. And so the microbiome was that 0 to 1 for me. Once you understand the microbial world, which, by the way, when I would talk about it 5 years ago, people kind of like, oh yeah, gut health a little. But I think 2020 has shown you that one microorganism can fundamentally change the world forever.
Yeah.
So, of course, I work in the beneficial kind of bacteria. But I think it's incredibly like nobody thought about surfaces and their airways and their ACE2 receptors and their lungs and hugs and no one thought about the microbial world until 2020.
I know.
We were building this company since 2016, but most people haven't. And if we did think about it before this, it was through the lens of almost an entire century of antibacterial thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So the antibiotics, antibacterial this, antimicrobial this, cleaning products, Clorox, actually a perception that has really not served us. And so I think for me, once you see microbes in the microbial world and you understand the microbiome, which, by the way, is like 38 trillion microbes that live in and on you, it's about 3 to 5 pounds of your body. For anyone trying to shed those extra pounds, you don't want to shed your microbiome. Like, it's like seeing the Matrix, and you can like fundamentally never unsee it. And then of course I got pregnant very shortly after my miscarriage. And when you're pregnant and that's where our name seed comes from, which is seeding, which is the process by which first receives their microbes, the majority of which is through the vaginal microbiome, through fecal matter and vaginal microbiome, and then also your mother's skin. And so that was, for me, that was it. It was like I could work forever in this invisible world and feel not. And the craziest thing about microbiome science versus like genomics is like, they sequence the human genome. It's not like you go to, Whole Foods today and buy something for your genome.
Yeah.
But, the human microbiome, and there's learnings that come out of the microbiome every day, and that science that is actionable. And I think that's why it was like so 0 to 1 for me, because you can look at human nutrition, you can look at everything you do, the choices you make, how you take care of your children every day through that lens. And to me, it's like when you can change, like, it's like when you go to the optometrist, when they're like trying all the different lenses, that's what it felt like to me. And I was like, wow, you could create, not just use the best science and work with leading scientists, but you actually could change the lens through which someone sees their body. And I think that to me was like 0 to 1.
This week's episode is sponsored by Odamont, which is tomato spelled backwards. Founded in 2018 when entrepreneur and foodie Andrew Suzuka created a flavorful sauce his picky eater daughter just couldn't get enough of, Odamont is the perfect way to add a nutritious boost to your family's go-to meals. If you've ever tried looking for an organic tomato sauce, you will know just how difficult it is to come by, because tomatoes are typically found to have high levels of pesticides and herbicides, which is why I'm so happy to have finally found and able to share with you all a trusted brand that can be purchased in a pinch at your local Whole Foods store. It's also available in a fiber-rich and dairy-free vodka sauce. And as always, we love sharing special promotions just for our fullest fam. So for 10% off your order at odamontfoods.com, use code THEFULLEST at checkout.
You talked a little bit about like how antibacterial world and how that's kind of the lens. I think that's super interesting, especially given this time. So I'm super curious how you view the way people are like freaking out. Obviously, rightfully so, there is something going on. If someone has a big health issue, it could be like catabolic, detrimental to them. But I'm curious, like, using Clorox and using all these antibacterial things, like how that's affecting your microbiome, and how seed, if there's any research that you guys have done, like how you could do it differently. Can you use bacteria instead of using something that's killing everything,
It's a great question. And there's like so many different ways to answer it.
Yeah.
You can start getting into the like, how long does SARS-CoV-2 like actually survive on plastic versus cotton? You could get into the fact that honestly, like the palms of your hand are actually not like very dense microbially in terms of other parts of your skin microbiome. So honestly, probably, and actually when surgeons started washing their hands, the survival rate in medicine went up like exponentially.
Wow.
And that was probably in the late 1800s, I think.
In general. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So it's not a, I know it's very easy. It's easier to speak in more kind of binary terms, but like, I think the way that I think about this, and certainly can get into a lot of the science, but I think like a more like human behavior way to think about this is that I think anything that is creating a tremendous amount of stress, like you need to look at and find a way to do it without crazy stress.
Yeah.
Because stress in itself is not good for your physiology, and it's not good for your immune system. And by the way, stress is not good for your microbiome.
Yeah.
The obsession right now, I think it's hard, it's interesting because people are living in like two different planets. Like there's people who are obsessed, and there's people you can't even get to put a mask on. So the thing that, if you ask me what concerns me the most about COVID, it is the reflection of our world that we won't care for one another, because we could have really mitigated this virus if we could all show up for each other. But that actually is probably like more upsetting to me than anything else. But if you ask me about the stress stuff, I think that taking, like, washing your hands and being very mindful of things is incredibly important. I think sometimes it's okay, and particularly for like very acute things, sometimes it's okay to be a bit more stringent about these things, because the behavior modeling of what it means when you lapse in that, you always, like in my mind, just in this country, I just imagine I multiply everything that I'm doing choice-wise by 331 million. And then you have to decide if you're okay with it. What happens is that it's a slippery slope of rationalization. So you start off doing something and you're just like, oh, now I've just gotten acclimated, and like I'm going to start not wiping this down, and I'm going to start not doing this, and I'm going to start not. And so it's not that for that individual, I think that like, oh, they're so much more at risk. And by the way, it totally depends on your risk profile. I mean, I think we understand morbidities at this point. I think we know that if you work with someone, if you live with someone elderly, someone who's immune compromised, like I think there's like very mindful, like there's nuance to this, right? But at the same time, I think we're seeing that it is the asymptomatic that are the greatest spreaders. And so and those are the people that then would probably immediately be more lax in their behavior, which then models for other people who are probably equally not susceptible and probably very highly likely to not be symptomatic, even if they did contract it. And you just like think about all those compounded actions. Then they're on Instagram, on their boat, at their party, at their dinner party, being social, quote unquote, social distance, rationalizing that they tested that morning to go to a party, which we know is absolutely fundamentally not true from the scientific perspective and doesn't, even with the best PCR testing, you could be infectious by the afternoon. It doesn't matter. I'm like, I wish I could be the like guest that's like, here's the listicle of what to do. The first thing is wake up every morning and care about every other human being on this planet. And that is the first thing. And then if you believe that every decision point that you make from there forward ladders up to that first thing, that is the best skincare routine like I could ever recommend. Wake up and multiply whatever you're going to do, unless you, of course, are an essential worker. There's other like, and multiply it by 331 million. Forget the rest of the world, just in this country. And decide how are you showing up around something that is literally killing people, and how have you rationalized it? And that's okay. Everyone has to, like, in this world, you have to there's some aspect of rationalization to everything you do. The question is, are you doing it with awareness, or are you doing it with confirmation bias and conviction? And who are you following, and where are you getting your information from, and what are you spreading, and what are you telling other people? I'm more concerned about people's social media hygiene than I am right now about them like washing their house with Clorox.
Well, that's what I was wondering though, is like, I mean, I don't know if you can like, obviously, you know, I don't want to like put you on the spot or have you say like, this is bad or this is whatever, but like, what does Ara use at her house? Like, what do you use?
Different things for different surfaces is the honest answer. If it's hand sanitizer, it's at least 68%, 62% or over ethyl alcohol. It just kills the virus. Also, soap does a very good job. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the soap doesn't really, I mean, there's many soaps. And I only say that because I'm incredibly conscious that like the 99-cent soap at the 99-cent store is probably not going to be any less effective, probably actually maybe even more effective than a lot of the others. So I think there's like soap. The soap piece is pretty important, just based on how lipids work in breaking down virus. Ethyl alcohol, in some cases we use like pure, and in other cases I just buy a good hand sanitizer. And beyond that, when we're out in the world, so no shoes. That's one thing that, I mean, we weren't always a big shoe household, but that is one thing that just like easy thing to mitigate. When we go out for a while and come back, depending on where we have been, which is seen pretty much nobody since March 9th. So it's not very exciting. I usually put my son in the shower and take a quick shower, but you know, that's, I don't know if that's necessary, but it's a more like, why not? And but I haven't eaten in a restaurant. Since March 9th. But I'm like, my point is that I have the capability based on how my life is structured to not do that. And others don't have that privilege. And so I exercise my privilege so that others are at less risk. And so, that's not to, I mean, again, all of this has so much nuance because there are small business owners that may hear that and say like, yes. And because you're not going out, no one's buying from my shop and I have to,
it's all so complex. Yeah, I know. And I see, and obviously you do too, as an entrepreneur, and you see both sides and you see that it's complicated I'm Persian, so my family like immigrated here from Iran. Some recently came here and like they left their wonderful jobs too. And I'm like, as an Uber driver now, like just they're doing whatever it takes to make ends meet here. And it's humbling to watch my family do that. And it's like, also, I totally agree. I see both sides. And sometimes I get like super defensive, in that sense, because I also like, and this is like another question I wanted to ask you, because a lot of times like with immigrants or our most vulnerable populations and minorities, obviously we are seeing, especially with this virus, like they're the ones that are hit the hardest, unless like you're an elderly person or immunocompromised. And and it has so much to do with things like gut health and access to preventative care. And because our healthcare in this country is just like totally lacking. And I'm just curious, like how you see the just how these like studies are gonna like play out in the future, and how you see maybe the government like coming, we're helping people have more access to vaccines. Like you can go down the street to Rite Aid and get a free one. You can get like a free ice cream and a vaccine, right? Like how can we do that with bacteria? Like that's going to be a game changer. So I'm super curious, like what you think about that, because like you said, there are certain things that like totally hit the chord with you with this virus. And like that's kind of the one thing for me, because I'm like, well, we need to like really understand why this is happening to them and how can we prevent this from happening in the future. Like, yes, we're at the place that we're at now, but like what about moving forward? How can we increase the health,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a huge question that I don't even know has to do with healthcare. I mean, sorry, doesn't only have to do with healthcare. I think that and my co-founder would laugh if he was on the call, because he's like, you will literally bring any conversation back to this one point. But, look, if 2020 has shown us anything, it is not that anything is a fix of passing a bill, or the fundamental tenets of our systems are broken. So if a system is broken, you can do a lot of things to ameliorate the outcomes of those systems, but until you really start to go into and saying like this has to be rebuilt, it is very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
With human health, I think that it starts with things like we are the only developed country in the world that has no paid leave for mothers. Like we have no federal support. Outside, of course, companies mandate this, but as you can imagine, the companies that have the best policies are self-selecting for the people who are socioeconomically, more educated.
Fair, yeah.
And so it starts from the day a child is born in this country. And by the way, even before that, because of the perinatal care and that exist. So like if you just start from, and you could obviously have to go back many generations to really think about it, but like if you just start from like the beginning of a life in this country, we fundamentally have it wrong. And if you put that through the lens, let's say, of gut health, we know that if a mother can't be home with a child, that child's not getting breastfed. We know the role that breast milk, by the way, actually, sorry, take it even back to the hospital. We know that like the care, even in the hospital, we know that preterm birth is, predisposed to certain populations and communities that are also lines up with, of course, the communities that need better healthcare in general. Then, which by the way, totally like side, like crazy fact that preterm birth has never been lower. The rates have never been lower during COVID, which is like very fascinating. But preterm birth, just to be super clear, is a $22 billion burden on the American healthcare system, in addition to the fact, of course, of like the tragedy of it, right?
Yeah.
Then a child comes into this world in this country, and they're potentially, most likely not with their mother, at least the children that probably are at the most risk for the things you're talking about. We know, and I'm only speaking, there's so many factors to this, so I'm only coming through the microbiome perspective, but I say that with like a lot of acknowledgement that there's like a lot of other things that aren't happening. We know that breast milk is fundamentally critical to the development of an infant's healthy microbiome. We know the correlations with the rise of allergies, the rise of type 2 diabetes, other like autoimmune conditions. And then just starting to, I think, even understand like the role in metabolism and metabolic, and so, I mean, so many things. So from day one, the hospital experience all the way to, or the birthing experience and the prenatal experience, all the way through, just think about like systemically, we've set up a system that doesn't support a mother to breastfeed. So just start from there, because we know the role that, I mean, a third of the carbohydrates in breast milk are not for even the infant's human body. They're just food, fertilizer for the microbes that are in that infant's gut.
Wow.
A third of the carbohydrates, not even digestible by the infant, the human part of the infant. There's a breast microbiome. There are microbes that like evolve to live on our breasts and our nipples that help an infant digest lactose, just to like show how crazy evolution is. And so from the very moment, right, of birth, like you're talking about a disadvantage. I'm again only talking, there's so many other pieces to that, but that already to me. And then you start to get into, okay, well, what formula is being used? What are the nutritional disadvantages? We know that plant fibers are incredibly important to as prebiotics, right? As to helping beneficial bacteria proliferate, grow, but also create really important things as a child's immune and GI system develops. And so like and then you could go on and on about the intersectionality between like environment and racism, and like the role of the environment, and of course being in more urban areas where we know there's like lower microbial diversity. I mean, we can go like on, obviously on, go on and on. And I think that lack of exposure to nature and more microbial diverse environment. I mean, like really on and on. There's, by the way, even research, this is just so crazy. Factory workers and people who work on any kind of night shifts have huge disruptions to their circadian rhythms, and therefore their metabolism, and in some cases their gut. And so there's something called, if you've heard of secondhand smoke from smokers, so there's secondhand circadian rhythm disruptions.
Whoa.
Which is that the family members of people who live with people who work at night also see impacts that are similar to, because there's a lot of navigating around somebody who's working at night and the disruptions of sleep cycle. And so like, that's what I'm saying is like, you have to look at so much of this so systemically, right? Like the deals that which formula company has a deal with the hospitals that has a greater deal.
Yeah.
Like, you have to like, we don't set our systems up correctly. So I would love to say that there's one thing, and the things that I'm saying, unfortunately, are so big that it's like, well, I guess you just throw your hands up, because how do you change it? And so you change it. This goes back to what I said earlier, that this is why tinkering is so important. Incremental changes can be really impactful. And so, and I think, and may have to happen at the state level or the county level before they get to be federally mandated. And so there's incremental, like, I know there's like in Sacramento or in Oakland, the mayor that's doing the universal basic income testing, right? And seeing like, what is the success of just giving people money every month who really are having trouble. And I'm not advocating that that's the answer, but just to say that, and actually to bring it back to science. And one of the reasons when you asked me why I came to science, and what you were asking me even before we got on the call, is that we have to have some constructs for experimentation. And we have to have more people who are thinking about hypotheses and how you can experiment and how we can learn together. But you can't do that if the world fundamentally just operates on confirmation bias. So if everyone just goes out in the world looking for all the ideas that just support what you want to believe, we're not moving anywhere. And that's what you've seen 100% worse than COVID is the disease of confirmation bias.
Meet Onda, the regenerative hemp company that goes way beyond organic. Onda exists for healing the people, empowering farmers, and supporting the regeneration of the earth. Onda's nutrient-rich hemp and herbal products not only help you stay healthy and in balance, but support regenerative, organic, and biodynamic farming practices and a new way of doing business that values the health of our social, cultural, and ecological systems. Try Onda's whole hemp tinctures, capsules, and balms to elevate your flow, soothe your nerves, help you sleep, and alleviate soreness and inflammation. Onda is offering 15% off plus free shipping for the Fullest family. Use code TheFullest15 at checkout.
Oh my gosh, I want to read what you're reading. Like, how can we get a hold of what is in Ara's inbox, all these studies?
Oh, they're on our Slack channels.
Yeah, I know you guys like share stuff on your Instagram. Like, I remember
we do.
You guys share some studies that are super interesting. I think it's super cool. I love that.
I mean, I'm very grateful for I get to wake up every day with people who I get to see the world differently, you know, and hopefully at Seed we try and serve that up in a way that to share that, you know, but not just share it like in a one-dimensional way. I think we really, like I told you, we launched that science class yesterday.
Yeah.
I know this later, but you know, we really we you know, our hypothesis was you know, we launched it with this streetwear brand called Come Back as a Flower. And that was fundamentally just the hypothesis of like, could you make learning science as urgent and relevant as a sneaker drop?
Yeah.
We'll wait around the corner for a pair of sneakers.
Mm-hmm. I know.
But we won't learn a little bit of science that we could change our life.
Tell us more about Seed Lab.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Seed Labs is where we do kind of fellowships and work with a lot of innovators around the world in different labs, thinking about how you can use bacteria to solve some of our biggest problems that are facing, you know, our collective home and the environment. And so we have some early work that we haven't announced yet across areas like coral microbiome, fire microbiome, which obviously is especially relevant here in California. But our first project was a probiotic for honeybees.
Aww.
And we created, we just published, I think, our second or third paper on it with Brendan Daisley, who's our PhD fellow. He was our first Seed Lab fellow. And it's a probiotic that's administered in the hive that increases the bees' immune resistance to neonicotinoid pesticides. Honeybees have a gut microbiome, and it is very impacted. And it's not just for the reduction of colony collapse disorder, which I think most people, or a lot of people, there's a lot of bee lovers out in the world, a lot of people know about that, but it actually reduced the loss of the larvae due to American foulbrood disease, which is actually also incredibly impactful in honeybee communities.
Wow, I had no idea about that. I just knew that they would like just all of a sudden, die, because especially like in California with the almonds and how like we just spray them with so many pesticides and glyphosate and stuff like that. So I think that's really interesting. So that's really cool. So you guys just like come up with these ideas and just apply them?
I mean, this was one that doesn't give the right amount of credit to the incredible PhDs and researchers that we work with from around the world. I would say we come up with and are curious about different areas of microbiome research, i.e. the soil microbiome, the coral microbiome, fish, ocean, other kind of, we're actually sending microbes up into space next year with a big project to see in this case, how they would degrade plastic in space, because there's going to be a big space trash problem in the future. So, those are areas where we like have a hypothesis, but we kind of go out looking for collaborators and the people who are doing a lot of that research
already.
And then we partner with them and usually initiate some sort of fellowship or partnership to be able to accelerate the research and or do our own studies like we did with our honeybees.
That's cool. Wow, the trash thing. I need to look more into that. So what's the future of seed? I know you talk about oral care, skin care, and I'm so curious. I know you have the one product right now, and we were just talking about how probiotics can, or bacteria can be applied so that in terms of probiotics, you can have it targeting one specific thing, right? I mean, am I butchering that, or is that?
I would actually maybe turn it around just to say that I would say that in order to qualify scientifically as a probiotic, it must be a strain of bacteria that has been studied to be alive and administered in a very specific dose, and then measured to have a very specific outcome in the host, which is you in this case.
Mm-hmm.
It could be as we just talked about. So I would say it's more that what qualifies to be a probiotic, and then what one must do, or what a scientist or researcher has to do to then qualify it scientifically as a probiotic, and that's usually through some sort of human clinical research and sometimes other models, depending on what the biomarker or the measurable impact is. And so I think that's kind of how we think about it. So the very simple way to think about that is it's a strain of bacteria that is alive and has to be administered in a very specific dose and then studied or in clinical research to have a measurable outcome in the host.
And you were just sharing a study with me, and that came back today. You said that seed has like 100% efficacy, right?
That's different than qualifying something as a probiotic. That has to do with understanding survivability through the various stages of digestion, which has a bit more to do with like a technology or a delivery system, and less with a specific outcome.
Okay, interesting.
Meaning that has to do with the survivability and where the microbes are delivered in the GI system. And so I think a lot of people know that by like survivability or aliveness, which is I think a heuristic that a lot of people understand about probiotics, but that is not a measurable outcome in the host where like that's not that's not like a benefit like increased motility or supports like tight junctions for gut barrier integrity, for example.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, tell us about where you're going to take the brand. Like what can we look forward to? You're doing so much already.
I think the way to think about where we're going to take it, based on what I can say today, is we really think about all these areas of our health, the ecosystems of our body. So like the oral microbiome, the skin microbiome, the vaginal microbiome. Then we think about life stages. So what are the stages in human life where a microbe could be applied to have an impact? A good example would be what I talked about with infant health. Like as we talked about, for particularly an infant that's not able to breastfeed for some reason, for any number of reasons, or a microbe that's studied to increase bone density for elderly population. So I think that's a good example of like life stage, and then of course specific conditions. So we recently announced our IND that was granted by the FDA to initiate a trial at Harvard with Dr. Anthony Lembo to study our current daily symbiotic product in IBS population.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, it actually it's a very interesting study because we didn't really set out to study IBS or really ulcerative colitis or Crohn's at all. And it was initiated by, honestly, over a year of anecdotal feedback from people who have IBS, UC, or Crohn's, and who just said that the daily symbiotic was the only thing that ever helped them. Now that's entirely anecdotal and not supported today. This is where I always tell you I'm the worst salesperson.
Yeah.
Like absolutely not supported by science today. But it was so robust in terms of the anecdotal feedback that it is what initiated us to say, okay, we need to really understand like what's happening here. In science, there's something called like mechanism of action, which is basically like investigating why something like trying to understand exactly what it's doing and why it's having that impact, which doesn't always mean that if you don't understand the mechanism, it's not beneficial. It's part of the process. So we initiated that study to not just to see how the daily symbiotic impacted the gut of people with IBS, and other things like quality of life and various symptoms, but also to better characterize the understanding of the gut microbiome in patients with IBS. So the trial is not just about our product in an IBS population, but it also has an entire metagenomics, which just means that we're going to be trying to deeply understand the correlation between gut microbiome and why someone may have IBS and or the severity of it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I know a lot
Which
of
by
people.
the way, affects 12% of the American population, which is crazy.
Exactly. I was just going to say, I know a lot of people that have it. So that's going to be a really big deal. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share more about your story too. I love getting to know you more and what moves you and what drives you to keep Seed going and to explore all this. And I'm just really excited to have had the chance to talk with you. So thanks for coming on. I love you. I love the brand. I love everything you guys stand for, and I just really appreciate you.